let's get to David and Bat Sheva now. Very grateful that you're all here and building up our class has grown both live and online. We're approximately double. We've grown to double what we were a year ago. We used to get about 35 to 40 people would watch it online on YouTube. Now we're getting 80 to 90 views. And Baruch Hashem, spread the word, forward the links, and subscribe, all those things. But most importantly, thank you for being here live, because that brings out the juices in me. And I'm really start off with the Ralbag on 12:7. Let's see. On Perik Yud Bet is the story of Natan the prophet coming and reading the riot act to King David and telling him what he's going to have to pay. So Ralbag gives us a good summary of everything as we move forward, instead of my getting started with a summary that will take longer. He gets right to it. Let me see if I can make this a little bigger for your benefit as well. See if that did any good. Okay. Bayomer Natan el David ata ha'ish. So Natan told him the metaphor. David was outraged about the rich man who took the sheep of the little poor guy. And then Natan said, "You're the rich man. You're the one who killed that sheep." Amru Rabbeinu Zichronam Levracha, our rabbis of blessed memory, said, Ki chamoshe shafat David, Kain haya, that God's ultimate punishment to David was actually imposing the punishment that David would have imposed on the rich man in the metaphor. That is not to say that God did not already have that punishment in mind with a plan. But what instead happened is HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent Natan to prophesy, in this case to tell him a metaphor about the rich man with the many sheep and the poor man with only one little pet sheep and da-da-da-da-da. David responded with outrage that man should be punished in the following ways. Natan then said, "That's not a real thing that I saw, that's you, with Uriah and Bat Sheva." And then God, Ralbag says, imposed on David essentially the punishment that David decreed on the imaginary, metaphorical, evil rich man. Chamoshe Shafat David, exactly as David handed down pronounced punishment, a verdict, Kain haya. That's what God did. Kamosha amar tachat Chizkiyah Yeshalem batayim. David had said, among the things that should be done is that where does he put? Well, just take my word for it. Well, yeah. So, just as David, that Chizkiyah Yeshalem batayim, he shall pay for the lamb 4 times over, just as David pronounced that the rich man's punishment should include having to pay 4 times over. And last class we saw that's a Torah pasuk, that if someone steals sheep and then slaughters it or sells it, he has to repay the original owner 4 sheep. So in the same way, God imposed that same punishment on David, namely that David had to pay, let's see, it was 12:7. Just as David had said that the rich man will have to pay 4-fold, kihu heimit Uriah, because since David effectively caused the death of Uriah, umetu tachtav arba'ami banav, and we never learned this till now, but there was an understood, unwritten midrash that Uriah had 4 children who became orphaned. It doesn't say that anywhere in our text. That's a tradition. And so David orphaned the 4 children of Uriah. Again, we have learned that Uriah was chayav mita, was liable for the death penalty because he had been in rebellion, and David had the authority to have him executed. Nevertheless, because it arose as a complication from David having been with Bat Sheva, getting her pregnant, etc. Although it was not technically illegal, he did nothing technically against the law. He so violated the spirit of the law and simply what's right, yosher, tzedek, just simple right justice, that God therefore punished him 4 times with 4 children. Vehem ben Bat Sheva, and which 4 children? First of all, Bathsheba, has that son who dies. Remember, we just learned, we'll go back, but David was sitting and mourning and crying and praying and fasting and please God, spare the baby, and the baby ultimately died on his 7th day of life. And then David saw his attendants started whispering to each other, and he inferred that they didn't want to tell him directly. So he figured out the baby had just died, and then he got up and he started to eat because his attendants were shocked. We thought, since you wouldn't eat when your baby was alive, now that he's dead, we thought, God knows what you would do to yourself. And David said, as long as he was alive, I fasted, maybe I could bring about a change in God's decree. Now that he's dead, what can I do? May as well try to stay alive and eat something. So the son of Bat Sheva, that's very unusual Hebrew structure, Ben Bat, but it's actually Ben Bat Sheva. First of all, the son of Bat Sheva, of Bathsheba. Secondly, Amnon. We're going to learn the next chapter, chapter 13, next week, Mirz Hashem. He had a son, Amnon. Amnon will do something unspeakably evil from out of nowhere. It actually, we will understand immediately, it is God proceeding with the death sentences that he's handed down on 4 of David's sons, parallel to the 4 orphaned boys that were orphaned by Uriah dying at David's decree. So Amnon will do something absolutely unspeakable that will result in him dying. For Absalom, David's perhaps most beloved son of all, was Absalom, and he will emerge. I don't like to do spoiler alert type things, but it's really, if Radak is ready, Ralbag is ready to do it, that's the best way I could teach it. David's most beloved son, Absalom, because of circumstances that will arise, will decide to overthrow his father, attempt to kill his father, unable to catch him and kill him, drive him out of the country. David will run for his life across the border into neighboring enemy land to stay alive. And Absalom will do even much, much worse than that. We'll get to that. And he will die prematurely. So the son of Bat Sheva, Amnon, who's going to do the unspeakable, Absalom, who's going to die prematurely, trying to kill his father, Adoniah. And Adoniah, on David's last days of life in his deathbed. So the question is, who will be the next king? In the United States, after the president, there's the vice president. God forbid, God forbid. In Israel, I believe if, God forbid, they have a deputy prime minister. And for all I think they may probably end up having to call new elections. I'm not sure. But different countries have different ways of dealing with it. In a kingship, it's normally the oldest son. So Adoniah was older than Solomon. Solomon is not born yet. Solomon's going to be born to Bat Sheva. He's the one that's coming next. With the little baby having died, she will get pregnant from David again, and that will be Shlomo. But Adoniah is already older than he is. And as David's dying on his deathbed, Adoniah will declare himself king before young Shlomo has a chance to be named king. It becomes very, very messy. We've all heard of Solomon, so you can connect the dots. Adoniah is going to die. So imagine, I finished last class, so I won't get into all the drama and emotions again, but I did it at the end of last class. God forbid even one child to die in a parent's lifetime. But four, I mean, and I spoke about at the end of last class, I won't repeat that for time and other reasons, but this will be part of his punishment, is some punishment. V'hanir'eh be'inai ki alma she'amar yishalem arbatayim hu shafto Hashem yitbarach. And so beyond all that, Rabbach says, I believe furthermore that this is also that God judged on David, sheyishkav ish im harbe min hashav le'enei hashemesh, that a man would come and sexually, not just molest, but, to say it, I don't want to say I could sleep with it, it's too nice. He's going to rape, basically. That a man's going to come and publicly, basically rape a whole bunch of David's wives and concubines under the sun in daylight, in the presence of the nation. And this is also part of the punishment for this Bat Sheva incident with Uriah. V'hu haya Avshalom, and that was that same beloved son, Absalom, who after he drove his father out of the country intending to kill him, then publicly negated his father as king by publicly raping the women that his father had gone to bed with. No one can do that. We've learned the Rambam, both Thursday nights and Tuesday nights, no one is allowed ever to marry the wife of a king. If the king dies, no one's ever allowed to marry a king's widow, ever. She remains unmarried forever, with the one exception that the next king. And we learned that last week about how David was able to marry Ritzpah, the concubine of Saul. But no one else. So here, his son, I mean, all the layers of that, sleeping with the king's wife, sleeping, raping, broad daylight, and just the idea of sleeping with a father's wife. That's chapter 18 of Sefer Vayikra, the book of Leviticus. It's incest to sleep with a father's wife. Shaba al Eser Pilakshe Aviv. He raped 10 of his father's concubines, and so on and so forth. However, one aspect of David's of the verdict that David furiously handed down against the metaphorical bad guy, God did not carry out or mirror in any way one element of that verdict, where David said, Chai Hashem ki ben mavid ha'isha said so. Where David said, and furthermore, that guy who stole that little sheep from the poor guy deserves to be executed. God did not hand that punishment down. He did not cut David's life short by a minute. According to a midrash, is a very interesting midrash that Adam Harishon, Adam, first man, lived 930 years. That says in the text, in Breshit, in the first book of the Torah, he lived 930. So the rabbis ask, like it would be like nice if it was, not that it's nice, but maybe you would have expected a round number. If God was going to have the first man, Adam Harishon, live 930 years, why wasn't it just like a simple rounded 1,000? And the Midrash says he was intended to live 1,000 years, and Adam Harishon said to God, you've given me prophecy. We don't think of Adam Harishon as a prophet, yet no one to prophesy to. But God talked to him, right? Talked to him, don't eat from this tree, don't eat from that tree, be fruitful and Peru or Avu, be fruitful and multiply and populate you. God told him stuff. And so they had a conversation. Apparently God told him that there'll be a Messiah someday, and the Messiah is going to come from a King David. But anyhow, somehow in the discussion, God was looking for 70 years David's going to have a 70-year life, and God was looking for 70 years to borrow from someone else's life. And Adam Harishon said, he said he could take it from Adam Harishon. So the Midrash is that he lived 930 years and he gave 70 years to David. And we're going to learn about that in greater detail another time. But the idea is that God did not take away one day from David's 70 years in punishment of this matter. So this is what Ralbag is saying, that he did in every other way parallel in the decrees that David handed down, but not when it came to shortening his life. When it came to that, Amarlo Natan, the prophet Nathan said to David, Gam Hashem he'evir chatatcha. To this degree, God is forgiving. Not completely, you've got punishments coming up, but God is requiting, God is reducing, and God is eliminating your sin. Lo tamud, you will not die. However, ba'avur shene'ezar b'cherev sona'av laharogoriya, nevertheless, because you, David, instead of having a clean, monarchical, king-like execution, death sentence for a rebel, inasmuch as you instead did it all kind of circuitously by having your enemy's sword kill him, because he set it up for his chief of staff, the head of his army, Yoav, to put Uriah in the front lines against Ammon, and then they killed him from the front lines. So Natan says that although God is forgiving, ultimately, with these punishments, cleaning your slate, nevertheless, because you had Uriah killed by the sword of your enemy, Ammon, rather than do it clean, Dino shetimshol cherev sonav al beito yamim rabim, you will face the punishment that your enemies will wield their swords against your family and house for much of your remaining life. And that's what ended up happening. First of all, because of what happened. So I can best compare it, as I have done in the past for you, to the idea of the American presidential pardon. That's how I compared it. When the president pardons someone, and I'm not getting into the politics whether they're good or bad pardons, when a president pardons someone, you still know the guy was found guilty of XYZ. Typically, if the president pardons the person, it's a famous person. Either it's one of the president's relatives. I'm not being political, it's both of them, Trump and Biden. And so it's either the president's relatives, they're famous, or it's a famous guy who's a big political donor. And the president, before leaving the White House, the guy gave me a lot of money, so I'll pardon him. And again, I'm not getting into the politics and my own feelings about that. Now, when a guy is pardoned in an American presidential pardon, we all know the guy did it. And we all know the guy really did it. And the only reason he got a pardon is because he's the president's father-in-law. So we all know it. Or the president's son. So we all know it. And in fact, we totally know that if a guy was pardoned before his trial, we already know that that's because he was going to be convicted. So what's the point of a pardon? The point of a pardon is more than a legal fiction. Although we know the guy is a crook, by law, and I taught you this last time, he's treated as though he never did the sin. And when he applies for a job, it's not on his resume, and he may not be denied a job based on that crime, and no one may refer to it as part of his resume. He could sue for defamation. He's been forgiven like it never happened, even though we all know it did happen. And that's a pardon. By the way, a commutation, people don't always distinguish. When a president does a commutation, the crime remains officially on record for life, but the punishment is wiped out. So if a guy was sentenced to 20 years for murder, and the president and the guy has been sitting 3 years, and the president does a commutation, that means the guy doesn't have to sit the other 17 years, but he's still a murderer. Whereas with a pardon, the guy never committed a murder. Okay, so what HaKadosh Baruch Hu basically is saying is, I'm giving you a pardon. You're paying the penalty, more than a commutation, a pardon. You're paying the penalty with your 4 sons are going to die prematurely in horrible, terrible ways because they're going to do horrible, terrible things. And your pilakshim, your concubines are going to be invaded, etc., etc., etc. But I'm clearing the slate. I'm giving you a pardon. And you'll have a holy place in Olam Haba. You'll have the most holy of places in the world to come. And Mashiach will come from you. And in this class tonight, we'll see the extra little thing. I've talked about it before, because he did true teshuvah. He did perfect, the ideal form of teshuvah, repentance. The ideal form of repentance is no excuses, is immediately, as soon as you are told what you've done, I don't mean you, but him, as soon as the person's been told what he has done, instantly, upon immediate reflection, he accepts not only that he's being accused, he accepts the reality that he has so much to beg forgiveness for, and that his sin is greater than he can bear, and he acknowledges it. And to the day he dies, he doesn't stop asking God to forgive him, even after he's told he's pardoned. And that's what makes him the holiest of the holies. So here, as we continue, okay, so on the Malbim here, let's just take that off the screen. So Malbim is telling us on verse 13, Pasuk Gimel, Vayomer David el Natan chatati l'Hashem. No sooner you acted in secret, but I'll make this happen in the sight of all Israel and in broad daylight. We just talked about that. The raping of his concubines, and we talked about it. And the minute David hears it, Vayomer David el Natan chatati l'Hashem. I sinned before God. I stand guilty before God. It doesn't say that he went home. It doesn't say that he immediately. Vayomer Natan el David, Gam Hashem ha'evir chatatcha lo tamut. And Natan immediately says, because God's message to the prophet comes instantly, like a text or a WhatsApp, immediately. I have forgiven him. His sin is past. He will absorb those punishments. I'm not commuting aspects of the verdict. But lo tamud, he will not die, and it is forgiven. Now, let's see this. Malbim says, Yavdel ben David ben Shaul. Here we see the difference between King David and King Saul, his predecessor, who was, we learned that for all the troubling, problematic elements of Saul's nonstop pursuit of David, always trying to kill him, and that he killed all the Kohanim in the city of Nov, and he sought a prophecy from a fortune teller, which is a life or death punishable sentence under explicit Torah law, and some other things you may remember. There were those 4 things that he did, the reasons that he lost the kingdom. We learned that the Meforshim them, that he lost it for 4 reasons. And he was still, we learned, that in his death he was a tzaddik. He died righteous. Partly he had some kind of psychological, emotional, mental issue. It was what it was. And he had a paranoia. But he was a tzaddik. And it's like, go ahead and judge someone who has up and down, and not just like bipolar, but really, we can't judge. That's God's job. And we're told that Shaul was a tzaddik, but still not on the level of David. Malbim says Shaul natan am talaot al chet'o. Saul had all kinds of excuses why he sinned by not completely eradicating Amalek, but instead allowed King Agag of Amalek and all the sheep and the best sheep and the best cattle of Amalek to continue living, when he was commanded to eradicate all of them. And instead of saying, I sinned, he eventually got to that spot. But first he said, well, I killed everybody else. I only left the king alive. And the sheep and cattle that I left alive, I killed all of it except the best ones, because those we were going to offer to God as a loving sacrifice and offering. Yeah, and then Saul had to come, and then Shmuel, Prophet Samuel, had to come back and say, but I didn't tell you, God didn't say to leave the king alive. God said, kill all of them. And as we learned back then, the Midrash, that during the brief amount of extra time that King Agag lived, he raped a woman in the prison service who was one of the, whether she was a guard or whether she was a cook in the jail, he raped her, and from that rape came Haman, which is why in Megillat Esther, Haman is referred to as Haman ha-Agagi, Sonei ha-Yehudim. The Agagite. What's an Agagite? An Amalekite. Why is it called an Agagite? Because he was the son of Agag. He descended from Agag. Well, when did Agag, if all the Amalekites were killed, with the exception of Agag, what son of Agag? Well, he got a woman pregnant in prison, in jail during that brief period. And a child's tribe is based on the father. So I guess the woman that he raped probably wasn't Jewish. Otherwise, that would make Haman no. He wouldn't be. Yeah, he would be. He'd be Jewish. So it must have been a foreign maidservant working in the prisons, whom he raped. That's how you straighten out that slight question in your mind. Okay, so that's a difference. Shaul Natanam Tlaot Al Cheto. Saul had all kinds of excuses. And then afterwards, when Shmuel said, well, that's not a good excuse, Saul also said, well, the public, I was under pressure from the political pressure from the public. Everybody demanded that I spare the best sheep and the best cattle, and I couldn't stand up to the national pressure. A little bit, it's like, I don't want to compare exactly this thing where Netanyahu, maybe he feels there are certain things he shouldn't do, but there's 100,000 people marching every Saturday night in Kaplan Square in Tel Aviv, and he comes under too much pressure, and it's like you start to give in, especially in democracies. Politicians, at some point, they start reading the polls, and they give in, even though they know they're doing the wrong thing, based on their own principles. But so in the same way, that was, by the way, a very famous debate in England, where William Pitt, there was great debate in a democracy. Is the elected representative, is it a responsibility to be a representative and thereby vote in accordance representing the opinions of your constituents? Or is the concept that the constituents elect the man or woman, those days the man or woman they believe is their best intelligent representative, and then he should vote not based on what they say, but he now has the authority to vote based on what he thinks because they sent him trusting his judgment. Interesting question. So he says, well, the people, they pressured me. And then, well, let's remind ourselves. What was that all about? Samuel came to Saul. Saul said, blessed are you of the Lord. I have fulfilled the Lord's command. Hakimoti. I did exactly what you told me I need to do. And Samuel said, what is the sound of the sheep I hear? And the sound of the cattle that I hear? It's in my ears. I hear it. And Saul said, I brought them from the Amalekites. Troops spared the choicest of the sheep and oxen for sacrificing to God. But we killed all the rest. Hayoter hecharamnu. And then Shmuel said, well, let me tell you something. What the Lord just said to me last night. And Saul said, Daber, tell me, what did God say? And Shmuel says, that's what the people demanded of you? The people demanded it of you? You may look small in your own eyes. Katonata be'enecha. Maybe in your sense, you're just one humble guy. But you are the head of the tribes of Israel. At Rosh Shivtei Yisrael Ata. You no longer are just some humble, modest member of the tribe of Benjamin. Like it or not, the Lord God has placed you as the leader and king of the nation of Israel. You cannot give in to them. God made you, anointed you, and sent you on the road. And he said to you, Ad kolotam otam. And he said, go make war against the Amalekites till you exterminated every one of them. And therefore, why did you disobey God? Lo shamata b'kol Hashem. And instead you swooped down and you took some spoil and you did the evil. And then he starts with the excuses. But I did obey the Lord. I performed the mission. I captured King Agag. I declared Amalek, I wiped out Amalek. And the troops took it. I could, what do you want from me? The troops took some sheep and oxen. Shmuel said, do you think God wants sheep and oxen? He tells you this is what he wants you to do. He doesn't want sheep and oxen. If he wanted sheep and oxen, he would have said, kill all the sheep and oxen except for the good ones. He said, kill all of them. So he then goes on and he says, well, Saul tries one more excuse. Okay, I did wrong to transgress the Lord's command. Chatati ki avarti pi Hashem. Okay, but it's ki areti ta'am v'ashma b'kolam. But it was their fault. I was afraid of the people, and I gave in to them. I gave in to their pressure. And therefore, what we're seeing here is that Malbim points out the difference of David and Shaul, that whereas Shaul is immediately finding excuses, David doesn't say, well, I mean, she was divorced and she did go in the mikveh and he did give a get. David right away. He doesn't argue. He doesn't put up a defense. And that's why God forgives him. But David hodet techef. Immediately David, he didn't start making excuses that everything was technically legal and this and that and that and this. Hanavi Shashem kibel teshuvato. And the Navi said God accepted it. So we continue with the next part. This is Radak. So Radak is now talking about how it says that Natan, what happens immediately after? However, since you've spurned the enemies of the Lord, which means Hashem, Natan says, because you sinned against God, albeit, I mean, we've talked it out, but since you know what you know, even the child about to be born to you shall die. Bat Sheva's first baby is going to die. And then it says, Vayelch Natan al beito. And immediately Natan goes back home. So Radak picks up on that. And that's one of the reasons I really love learning this with the commentators that most people don't. Most people, really good thing. I mean, I'm saying it in a good way, not a bad way. There are a lot of families, for example, who, let's say, on the weekend, they sit the parents with the children, let's say on a Friday night or a Saturday night, Christians, Sunday morning before church, after church, Saturday, and they read Bible. Like the father will open up the Bible, and the family has a custom that every week the father, let's say, reads a chapter of the Bible, and the children sit with the mother or someone else, whatever it is, they pass the Bible around. And this is a beautiful, beautiful thing. If only every American would do that. But what we're doing is we're finding this so much more, and it's not pilpulistic, where some critics of the Talmud who don't know what they're talking about because they've never really learned Talmud say, oh, that's a Jewish thing. You're trying to find and you're picking little. There's a lot of stuff in the text that's right there, but you miss it. I do. You miss it because there's just so much there. And this is one of those. It says that Natan then went, and it's an important thing. What we should have expected, according to, I think it was Radak, is that after Natan, painfully, because he loves David, he loves the man. This is painful for him to pass along this news. You would expect after he passes along this horrible news, you would expect he'd stay around a few minutes. I don't mean that he would stop and talk baseball or soccer, but you'd think he would say something. I don't know. But Radak picks up As soon as he's finished, Gam haben yilod lecha mot yumat, and the son who is now being born to you will die. Vayelech Natan al beito. And Natan immediately turned around and went back home. Lahodia shenifrad mimenu techef, to let him see that he immediately turned around to leave. She'amar lo hanavua v'lo chalak lo kavod laharich v'lashevet imo. That because of the unique circumstances of this visit, he did not stay one extra moment to give David the honor to hang around a few minutes, have a cup of coffee, sit with him. In order to show David, demonstrate that Natan was completely possessed by a controlled rage. That is not like a guy with a bad temper who just loses it. He's got a sort of controlled rage, an act to let him know this is rage. Not by yelling, but by turning around immediately. Techef shehalach Natan al beito va'igof Hashem yelad. And look what happens. The wording, vayelech Natan al beito va'igof Hashem yelad. It's like no pause. Not vayelech Natan al beito v'David yashav al kisei. It's not like, and Nathan went back home and David sat, or Nathan went back home and and he went back to his house, and God smote the baby right away. Chala choli kaved. The baby immediately was smitten with vayei anash, with a mortal disease. Enosh is a person, a human being. A man is an ish. Men are anashim. And vayei anash is he was smitten with a mortal disease from which he would be more than critically ill, a disease from which he would be very rapidly dying, the baby. And so continuing with Radak, so we know that from previous class that David cried out to God and pleaded with God and all of that. Shehit palel bi ad hanar, alafayin peyud afalpi. He prayed for the young boy, for the baby, even though Shanavi Amarlo Mot Yamut. Even though Natan said the baby will die very, very shortly, David immediately started to pray. Hit Palel Ba'ado, prayed for the baby. Kemosha Amar Hu, Miyodeh, V'chaneni Hashem. As it says a little bit later, let's see what pasuk this was. This is pasuk 15, 16. Okay, 16. So as happens in a little bit later, when the baby dies, and they don't want to tell him that the baby died, and then he gets up and he starts to eat, and they can't figure out what's all of this about. So he explains what happened was, Ba'od hayelet chayt samtiv evke. As long as the baby was alive, I fasted, tzom, like tzom gedalia, ve'evke, and I wept, because I said, mi amarti mi yodeh. I said, who knows? V'chaneni Hashem v'chay hayalad. Maybe God will accept my prayer. So he immediately started to pray, begging God, maybe he'll accept the prayer. And here we have a very important concept, which I'm going to, let's see, is it next thing online? Yeah. There is a concept in Judaism. I've got three tabs on this. This is I have 3 tabs on this, and this is the last part of today's teaching, so you have an idea of how I'm doing with time. It is a fundamental Jewish concept that we never stop praying, and we never give up. When Ellen Zichron Levracha was when the doctors told me it's not going to happen, it's finished, and they wanted me to just give them the word to go ahead and disconnect. Well, it wasn't a matter of disconnecting per se. It's a whole nother thing that'll take me a long halacha. I'll say really briefly. You're not allowed to disconnect the person who is terminally ill if the disconnecting will kill him on the spot, pretty much. You're only allowed to disconnect if you have insurance that disconnecting itself will not instantly kill the person. And usually, indeed, disconnecting does not instantly usually kill the person. A person can live hours or days without the machine connection. And if the person's on a machine such that if they disconnect, the person's going to die and not allowed to disconnect, then it becomes really, really complicated. And that's why a rabbi should be contacted before you put a person on a machine, God forbid. If a person's in that kind of situation, God forbid, and a person has to consider, do you put the person on the machine if you're not going to be able to protect the person off the machine? Whole bunch of stuff. I was still davening. I was davening, and Ellen and I, we understood we're not going to have a, what was her name? And we're not going to have a Karen Quinlan situation, God forbid. So we understood that neither of us is going to be kept as a vegetable for 30 years on a machine. But I don't wish this on any of you. Perhaps some of you have been in this situation. That's probably about, every class I've been ending the last few weeks is that this is the worst thing that you can imagine. But this is also the worst thing you can imagine, being the person who's got to make a decision with the love of your life, and the doctors are telling you, and you know they want to get the person off the machine for financial reasons. Okay, you've got that also going on, so you don't know how much you can really, really trust an objective, and so they have their reasons, and then you have your reasons, and then you don't want to lose the love of your life, and you also don't want a Karen Quinlan, and she didn't want a Karen Quinlan, but on the other hand, and so without going into like a half an hour of what I had to go through to explain, the bottom line concept that guided me also was you never stop praying and you never give up. So how do you blend? That's how law works. What happens when you have two conflicting laws, right? You're supposed to pay ransom to free the hostage, but you're not supposed to pay more than a certain ransom. And where's that line? So it's like this with all of Jewish law, as with every legal code. And the question becomes, do you give up? And the answer is you don't give up. David is not now facing a situation whether to take the baby off a machine. Simply that the baby's dying. God has said he's going to die, and it's like no chance. And so David, does he give up? He doesn't give up. As long as that baby is alive, he's fasting and he's praying. We never give up. And when it's a situation where like what I had, let's say, with Ellen or Zichron Lavracha or something like that, and that's why very often a rabbi gets consulted in those moments. And it's a hard one. It's not easier for me when it's with someone else, but that's what happens. So here David's praying, and this is the Mefarish. This is the commentator talking about we never give up. And as I said, I have three quick tabs here, which will flesh out what I just taught you. So, Afal Pisha Haya Ona Shavuno, Hare Onsho Onish Gadol. This is a massive, massive punishment that David knew was coming on the baby, Bomrolo, and nevertheless, he continued to pray. V'hit palel la'el, she'avir mimenu onish hayelet. He knew he's going to be punished with the other children, and there are going to be swords against him coming from within his home, and there are going to be rapes of concubines. But right now, at this moment, he's praying for that baby till the last moment. So let me go through these tabs and finish this teaching about the notion that we never stop praying. It starts with a verse in Isaiah. Yeshayah Parak Lamed Chet, chapter 38, verse 1. And this happened. And as with so much else, there's the superficial text in the Bible, and then there's the deeper learning. So let's first do the text 38, just a few, it's not the whole chapter. In those days, King Chizkiyah, who's one of the three most righteous kings in Jewish history, biblical kings. There was David, there was Chizkiyah, there was Yeshayah. They were the three most righteous kings of Judea. This is already, David was the United Kingdom. By the time of Chizkiyah, there was already the divided kingdom, and he was the king of Judea in the south. In those days, Chizkiyah fell dangerously ill. In other words, terminally ill. Lamut. That's not just dangerous. Lamut. He was terminally ill on the precipice of death. The prophet Yeshayah, Isaiah, came and said to him, I've been sent by God with a prophecy to send you. Thus says God, set your affairs in order, for you're going to die soon. You are not going to get well. And that's mate, not yamut. Not because you're going to die, because you're dead. You're not going to live. So that's not just coming from a doctor at the local hospital. That's the prophet Isaiah. Vayasev Chizkiyah panav akir. Chizkiyah, instead of putting his things in order, having been told he's going to die, gets up and starts to pray to God. He faces the wall, vayitpalel el Hashem, and he starts praying to God. Vayomar, ano Hashem zacharnot asher hitalachti lefanecha. He prays to God and says, oh God, please open my book, essentially, and remember me. I have always walked in your path, be'emet, with truth, ubelev shalem, and with a full, complete heart. V'hatov be'enecha asiti, and I've always done righteous, exactly what you would want. Vayev Chizkiyah b'chi gadol, and Chizkiyah started weeping, an enormous weeping, and God spoke to Isaiah. Vaydavar Hashem el Yeshayah lemor, haloch v'amarti el Chizkiyah kol mar Hashem Elokei David avicha. God says to Chizkiyah, Chizkiyah has already delivered the prophecy and has left the king's presence. King then started praying the way I just described. And God says to Isaiah, turn around and go back. Tell Chizkiyah the king, this is what God, the God of your father David, not literally father David, but like your ancestor David, you're in his lineage. Shamati et tefilatecha, ra'iti et demotecha. I have heard your prayer. I have seen your tears. I'm adding 15 years to your life. Whoa. So we see the prophet Isaiah has told him he's going to die. No hope, mate, lo tichya. He gets up and prays with no chance. And God sends back the prophet. You've got 15 more years. Gemara. We'll start this Gemara if I can do it really quickly, like within 5-6 minutes. Otherwise, we'll continue next time. Let's see where we've been. Okay. Amar Rav Hamnuna. Rabbi Hamnuna, a rabbi in the Talmud, taught, what is meant by the verse? There's a verse in Ecclesiastes. Who is like the wise man and knows the meaning of the secret? Who's like a wise man and knows? But there's a pun. The word pesher could also mean peshara, compromise. So the rabbi Rav Hamnuna in the Talmud is saying, I have a unique, creative way of understanding this verse from Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, Perek Chet, chapter 8. What does it mean when it says, who is the wise one? The one who knows the interpretation, but also the one who knows how to compromise. Mika HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who is like God, who knows how to create a compromise, a meeting of the minds between two mega tzaddikim, two mega righteous people. Here was the dilemma. There was a political dilemma. The king of Israel was Chizkiyahu. He had never met Isaiah. And the leading prophet of that day was Isaiah. He had never met Chizkiyahu. When does the prophet meet the king? Unfortunately, they don't normally get together for a Super Bowl party. The prophet normally meets the king when God sends him to pass along a prophecy to the king, which sometimes is pretty sharp. Here is Chizkiyah so righteous No punishments are coming his way. The prophet had no reason to meet him. Chizkiyah had not any particular reason to go meet the prophet. He's the king. So there was a problem. God knows how to make a compromise. Me, a Kadosh Baruch Hu, sheodeh la'asot pshara ben shnei tzadikim. Who is there like God who knows how to create a compromise between two ultra-righteous people? Bein Chizkiyah Yeshayah, between Hezekiah and Isaiah. Chizkiyah Amar, King Chizkiyah said, Leite Yeshahu Gabai. I should meet with Isaiah, but I'm the king of Israel. Not appropriate that I should go looking for him. He should come to the palace and introduce himself. Because that's what happened with Elijah. Up in the northern kingdom of Samaria, the prophet Elijah, Eliyahu, presented himself to King Achav. So the Bible tells us, Tanakh, in 2 Kings, Malachim Bet, that Eliyahu introduced himself to King Achav. And afterwards, they would have plenty more meetings because Achav was mega, mega evil, along with his wife, Jezebel. And it was the fate of Eliyahu, Elijah, to be the prophet assigned to be the one to call him, to read him the writer, call him on the carpet. So Chizkiyah said, it's not appropriate for me to go to him. It's only a matter of protocol that Isaiah needs to come and introduce himself to me. Meanwhile, Yeshayah said, Leite Chizkiyah Gabai, Dehachi Ashkechan B'Yoram ben Achav Dazal Gabi Elisha. Isaiah said, actually, elsewhere in the Bible it says that King Yoram, the son of Ahab, was the one who broke the ice when there was a new prophet after Elijah went up to heaven in the fiery chariot. Elisha, his protege, became the new chief prophet, and King Yoram introduced himself to Elisha. So the king introduced himself to the prophet. So Chizkiyah did not want to go and meet Isaiah. He wanted Isaiah to introduce himself, and Isaiah did not think it was proper protocol to go to the king because Isaiah is God's conduit. So how did God resolve this standoff? And it wasn't a bitter standoff. It was a matter of protocol. God brought deathly illness onto King Chizkiyah. The Armarlo Yeshayah, Yehoshua is Joshua, Yeshayah is Isaiah. And then God said to Isaiah, after bringing deadly illness onto Hezekiah, Lechu Bakir Dechola. God said to the prophet Isaiah, it's a big, big mitzvah in Judaism to visit the sick. So go and do the mitzvah. Not as a prophet visiting a king, but go visit the sick man. Not nice that you're a prophet and you don't do this mitzvah. Etc. Like it's what I read you. What I just read you a moment ago, that in those days, Chizkiyah got sick to die, and Isaiah went to go and visit him. And it just doesn't tell you the backstory. That's what we're doing now. And so he says, Ki meitata v'lo tichya. And the Gemara says something I did not tell you. This is even deeper. I was emphasizing that the prophet told Chizkiyahu, you are dead. Mate, not yamut. You're going to die, like promptly, v'lo tichya, and you're not going to live. And the Gemara says, all he had to say was, you're dead. He didn't have to say beyond that, you're not going to live. One goes without saying, literally. There was a deeper meaning. Ba'olam hazeh, you're going to die in this world, and you're not going to live in the world to come. You're not going to have a place in the world to come. Whoa. And who's so righteous? Where does that leave me? I mean, where does that leave us? The most righteous of kings, and he's not going to have a place in the world to come. So what's going on here? Omar le mai kulihai. So what happens is Isaiah goes to visit Chizkiyah on his apparent deathbed in the palace, explaining that Chizkiyah is going to die, and is not even going to have a place in the world to come. And Chizkiyah says, "My kuli hai, what is this? What's this about? What?" Amar le, Isaiah explains why. Mishum de lo asak beperia verivia, because you never attempted to have children. Now, this is a mitzvah on men. Let's understand. Number one, women are not commanded to have children. Women are necessary to have children, but the mitzvah is on men. That's why I don't want to get too far away. It's already getting too much over. I'm going to wind it down for now. I'll take it more, but let me just finish that since I said that. And we'll come back to it more next week. Mirz Hashem. When it comes to having children, men are obligated to be fruitful and multiply. Women do not have that obligation. It was imposed on Adam Harishon. He's getting a lot of time tonight. So there's a lot of things out of this. Number one, women, it's not their mitzvah. That's that. Number two, if a man tries to have children and does not succeed, either he's not fruitful, or his wife is not fruitful. That's not a sin. You try to do your best. And any of a number of different reasons. So if anybody in our group here, or anyone among the 100, 120 on YouTube picks this up, because you're married, if you don't have a child, God forbid, don't start doing what happens with me ever since my lung transplant. And every time anything happens, I go on WebMD and I start packing up. And then I call the doctor the next day and say, "Stop reading WebMD. They don't know what they're talking about." So anyway, in the same context, but if a person decides that because of overpopulation in India, we're not going to have children, that's a major sin that even King Chizkiyah could have lost a place in the world to come. That's if you deliberately make it your business for the man not to have children. Again, it doesn't apply to women, and it doesn't apply if a man is trying to have children and doesn't succeed. And it doesn't apply if there's other stuff going on. So it's very complicated, and you have to talk to a rabbi, and I've had people come to me at some point, young couples, and then there's the issue of birth control. Are you allowed to use birth control? And I don't want to just give a blanket yes, but obviously there's all these Orthodox people out there that do not have 10 children or 8 children. So, connect those dots. So there's a lot of halacha there. But some immediate halacha before we say goodnight. Number one, when a rabbi, for example, tells you that birth control would be allowed, it is the woman who must use the birth control. Al pi halacha. Whether, and again, I don't want to get started now, between pills and I was going to say IEDs with the Iranians, IUDs, and whether it's that, or we won't go into that, but the woman is the one in this situation where the rabbi says it is appropriate to be using birth control. It's the woman. The man does not use a condom and stuff like that, because the man is not allowed to interfere with his procreative act. It's the woman who does it. So that's a thing. There's a certain point on the subject of birth control. A rabbi should be consulted. And it's wrong. People have a custom where they'll say something like maybe with their closest friends, they're having a private talk, Shabbos lunch, they have their best friends over, and they're both in the same boat. And so someone says, the rabbi gave me permission not to use birth control, let's say. We got to be understanding, like whether the rabbi says your pan is still kosher, you can use it, or you can eat that food that's kosher for Pesach, or whatever. The rabbi is not giving you permission. Rabbi doesn't. I don't have the right to give you permission. I don't have the right to say you have birth control, or you have the right to eat this food on Pesach. I don't have the right. I have the authority to interpret God's law the best I've been taught to interpret it. The rabbi does not give you permission. The rabbi tells you that according to Torah law, God gives you permission. It's a very big difference, because one is right and one is wrong. But people will consult, and there's no one rule fits all. There are people in college and grad school where the rabbi might say, you can't use birth control. I'm sorry, I can't, not the circumstances you're describing. Or there might be a situation in college or grad school where the rabbi might say it's okay. Or there might be, after they have two children, a boy and a girl, maybe one time they come and the rabbi says yeah, no and yes, or they have four children, maybe it's complicated. So you have to talk to a rabbi. And the rabbi would tell you what God, according to the rabbi's best understanding of Torah law, allows or does not allow. But those are some important things to understand, that people don't always know that. It's when there is birth control, it is the woman who does it, not the man, because the man's not allowed to interfere. You're not allowed to get sterilized. Is the term sterilized? I don't. I think so. You're not allowed to get fixed. That's a better term. You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to do that. You always must maintain the potentiality of giving birth, like where like the men decide we have three kids and enough, and then you get tied up, and then they get divorced, and they have another marriage, and they want to have a kid, and now they have to get untied. On the other hand, there are certain medical circumstances where, for a woman's health, safety, other considerations, cancer concerns, other health there's just a lot of stuff. And that's why a rabbi should be consulted. And it's also wrong in the same way. That's why the state bar, they tell you that you're not allowed to practice law if you're not licensed by the state bar. And people feel, on this, I know what to do. I can get the forms and I know what to do. But the thing is, there are a lot of technical things and a lot of layers. And when someone hears, well, someone else had a similar situation and this is what their lawyer did, so I'll just do it that way. Yeah, but they might have a different situation, a very refined point that distinguishes one fact pattern from another. And so it is with halakha. The rabbi said you could eat this food. The rabbi may have ended up ruling, last thing, it's Pesach and you didn't buy grape juice and you don't have wine and you don't have anything and you never made a Seder before. And for whatever reason, you've just decided you're going to make a Seder and you don't have anything basically. And you call the rabbi and the rabbi says, you don't have anything. Yeah. Do you have non-kosher wine? I don't have any wine. Do you have anything? You have juice? You have milk? I have milk. I have 4 cups of milk. Well, then somebody hears the rabbi said that you could have a Seder with 4 cups of milk. Great. I have trouble with alcohol, so next year we'll do milk. But it's completely different. So you don't know what the circumstances are. So that's where we leave off, with David praying to God in a hopeless situation, following Jewish law that says you never give up. You never stop praying. For example, with King Chizkiyah, who had the death sentence from God via the prophet Isaiah, prayed and got 15 extra years, even though he had no hope whatsoever, because he got the word from Isaiah. And we'll continue, God willing, next week. Have a wonderful week. Let's see what goes on in the Middle East. What a crazy week. Okay, thanks for being here. Bye-bye.